Great. We are at 12 noon, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the first Lunch and Learn of our virtual Lunch and Learn series for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today we are talking about the impact of domestic violence on children, and we are joined by Becky Gilo from Youth Services Network. Becky is the program director for their youth trauma clinic at YSN. And before you guys all jumped on, Becky and I were reminiscing. We go way back. We used to work at Remedies together when Becky was the children's advocate, and I was one of the legal advocates over there. So we're happy to have you, Becky. I'll turn it over to you if you want to take it away.
All right. Thank you, Nikki. Yes, so I have been working with children that have experienced trauma and domestic violence for many years. And I'm happy to kind of talk about the domestic violence and the impact on children.
Okay, hold on. I'm
I,
supposed to be in this training.
I want to start with, if my computer will work, going through the, oh, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties now. Need to pull up the slides. There we go. Sort of giving the roadmap of today's Lunch and Learn and what I hope to accomplish in it. Starting by going over and understanding domestic violence, how trauma impacts the brain, how domestic violence impacts children, recognizing the signs and responses that we should have and how we should respond. Also, how we can help children heal and build resilience, while also kind of talking about community resources and next steps. So let's start with discussing what domestic violence is. It is a pattern of behaviors, not just a one-time incident that is used by one person to gain or maintain power and control over another person in an intimate or family relationship. While physical harm is often the most visible, domestic violence can include sexual, emotional, physical, psychological, financial, and digital abuse. It can even extend to, reproductive coercion, when someone controls another person's ability to make choices about their pregnancy or contraception. It also might look like threats, isolation from family and friends, stalking, intimidation, things that make another person feel very unsafe or trapped. Children can be abused, but even when they are not the target, they can be deeply affected by the abuse and exposure to domestic violence. Sometimes they are used as tools in the incidents. They are asked to take sides. They're asked to relay messages to the other parent or the other person. And this has deep impacts on their emotional and developmental abilities and throughout life. It's important to remember that domestic violence impacts everyone. It doesn't just impact certain communities. It affects every age, race, gender, income, and that it's about power and control, not anger or a loss of temper.
Hello? What's going on?
So these are some Winnebago County statistics that I pulled, but statistics can feel very sterile. I think these numbers tell a story. Rockford's domestic violence rate is roughly 10% higher than the Illinois average. meaning that it isn't a fringe issue, it's a community-wide concern. When nearly half of all violent crime is related to domestic violence, we are talking about thousands of children who are directly or indirectly exposed every year. The child abuse and neglect rate here is among the highest in the state. Behind every data point really is a child whose brain and body are adapting to survive in unpredictable environments. That's why it's important that we, as a community, have trauma-informed care, not only in therapy, but also in healthcare, in schools, in law enforcement, and community programs. It's important to know and look at how the pattern of domestic violence occurs. So let's talk about that next. Domestic violence is inherently traumatic, even if I skipped a slide, hold on my slides. Domestic violence is rarely constant. It often follows a cycle of violence, and that cycle keeps everyone off balance. It usually starts with a tension building phase, which is families often describe it as walking on eggshells, not knowing when something's going to happen. That moves into an incident phase, which may involve physical or emotional abuse. Then usually goes into the reconciliation phase, where there's apologies and gestures of, asking for forgiveness kinds of things. And these can be very confusing for children, as they tend to start to believe that, change has occurred or can happen. Then we move into a calm phase where, kind of things are normal and everything is kind of peaceful. For children, this cycle creates deep emotional confusion. They may feel relief one moment and fear the next, which leads to chronic anxiety and mistrust. Understanding this pattern helps us recognize why leaving or breaking the cycle is so difficult. I want to take a break from talking about domestic violence, and start talking about trauma, because domestic violence is inherently traumatic. Even if a child is not physically harmed, the constant exposure to fear, chaos, or violence changes how they experience the world. Trauma isn't just the incident itself, it's how it is experienced and the lasting effects it leaves. That's why when we talk about trauma, we talk about the events, the experience, and the effects of that traumatic experience, and why we have to look at all three of those things. A child may witness abuse, hear the yelling behind closed doors, or live in constant uncertainty. And throughout this, their brain and their body adapt to survive, and those adaptations shape their behavior, their learning, and their relationships. To truly understand trauma's impact, we need to look inside the brain and the body, not just sort of at the surface. So looking at the brain and thinking about our brains like giant networks of roads. These roads carry information. So right now, your brains are carrying information that either you're eating lunch or you're hungry, or you just finished lunch, your feet are on the floor, you're sitting in a chair, those kinds of things. Your brain is just constantly sending signals throughout your body. When we go through trauma and trauma experiences, certain roads, especially the ones related to survival, get used over and over again. So these pathways are things like hypervigilance, kind of constantly scanning for danger, constantly being on edge. It is the pathways for having the the survival responses, the fight, flight, freeze, submit responses. Because the brain is trying to protect us, it strengthens the pathways we use the most. So if you think about like a dirt trail, it becomes deeper and a worn path if people just keep walking on it. That's how our brain is reacting when there's trauma. The deeper paths are becoming those fight, flight, freeze responses, the hypervigilance. In trauma, the brain keeps reinforcing the danger pathways because it thinks the person is still in danger and they still need them. This means even after a trauma is over, a person's brain stays stuck in survival mode and reacts as if they're still in danger, even in very safe environments. That's why we see people that have experienced trauma overreact to small triggers. They feel unsafe even when things are not threatening. They struggle to calm down or connect with others. The brain isn't broken. It's just doing exactly what it is designed to do, and that's prioritize survival. Because the brain is so busy strengthening sort of these survival routes, so to speak, it really reduces the formation of other roads and other important pathways. Things like problem solving, emotional regulation, connecting to others, creative thinking, future planning. Those pathways aren't necessarily needed. We need to survive. So if you think of it kind of like this, if 90% of your brain traffic is racing down this danger highway, there's hardly any energy left to build roads for trust, to happiness, curiosity, relaxation, creativity. It's not because survivors of trauma are unwilling. It's just that their brains have literally no energy left to develop the pathways for these adaptive skills. I can't talk today, sorry. So it's important that we keep this in mind as we look through and look at how children are exposed to domestic violence. So children can be exposed to domestic violence in many different ways, both directly and indirectly. Exposure does not always mean that they have witnessed some sort of physical altercation. A child might hear yelling or threats or things breaking behind closed doors. They may see the aftermath, like injuries or a parent crying or damage to furniture or the walls or any of the property. They can simply sense tension in the home. That's all exposure. Infants and toddlers, even babies in utero, can feel the stress and emotional chaos in the environment. They pick up on changes in tone, body language, and routines. Some children do actually witness the violence firsthand. They even try to intervene to protect a parent or a sibling. They might be in the same room when violence occurs, or they can be used by the abusive partner as a way to control or manipulate the other parent. Sometimes this looks like, they're delivering threatening messages or forced to take sides, used in custody agreements and battles. It doesn't matter how a child is exposed to domestic violence. All of these experiences blur their sense of the world and their sense of safety. And it definitely sends a clear and powerful message to the child that the world is a very scary place. And people that you love are also people that you have to fear. And this belief is something that will stay with a child for years. So I want to take a closer look at the effects of exposure of domestic violence on children. When children are subjected to chronic stress, often referred to as toxic stress, it can significantly disrupt their stress response system. This dysregulation can manifest in various ways. They can have that hypervigilance, again, kind of always being on edge. They can be very rapidly into their fight, flight, freeze, submit responses, which again are the instinctual survival mechanisms. They might react strongly and quickly to perceived threats. On the other hand, children sometimes experience emotional shutdown and dissociation, where they detach themselves from their feelings to cope with overwhelming situations. It's easier to just kind of shut down and not necessarily feel what I'm feeling. Understanding these reactions is crucial for providing the right support. It's not just about recognizing the signs, but also acknowledging the profound impact of these on a child's well-being and their development. So when we are talking about supporting children after exposure, consistency is everything. Predictable routines help children heal and feel safe again. When a child either shares or shows distress, it's important that we validate the emotion. We don't rush to fix it. We shouldn't pressure and push for details or ask really investigative, probative questions. It's about focusing on creating a stability, giving them permission to express emotions, and providing a safe, caring adult to talk to. It's important that we as professionals collaborate with each other and with with the caregivers, which ensures that the child receives consistent support across all of their environments. So I want to talk a little bit about the signs of DV, and I'm going to dig into each of these a little bit more as we move through the slides. But recognizing the signs of violence in children and teens is essential for early intervention, for intervention at all. If we talk about behavioral strategy or behavioral changes we might see, they might start showing aggression or withdrawal again, from their family, from friends, from activities that they like to do. These shifts can be direct responses to what they've experienced, what is happening in their home. We're going to see emotional distress. Maybe it's an increase in fear and anxiety, which often manifests when they're navigating an unsafe environment. We will also see academic challenges and struggles. A child's grades could drop due to the stress that they're enduring. It's important that we understand these changes are signals, not just random occurrences. They're much like the cycle of violence follows sort of a pattern of behaviors. These are all going to be patterns of things that we see in children. In teens, the signs might overlap, but also include warning signs specific to dating violence. We might see more isolation and possessiveness and controlling from a partner. These situations can be very complex as teens may not recognize unhealthy patterns early on. So we have to really work with the children to, in a supportive manner, aiming to disrupt the cycle of violence. Understanding how domestic violence impacts children at different developmental stages is crucial for effective support. Ages 0 to 5, exposure to chaos can interfere with attachment, leading to issues like feeding or sleep disruptions, regressions. If a child has been potty trained, we might start seeing them not being potty trained anymore, having some more accidents. We might see separation distress where they are, if they've kind of taken on that protector role or tried to take on the protector role in their family, being outside of the family, they're distressed because they can't, in their brains, in their little brains, can't protect a parent or a sibling. As children move into school age, from about 6 years old to 12 years old, they will carry these stresses into the classroom and into their friendships. We start to see more somatic complaints, more physical complaints. We'll see the school difficulties and signs of anxiety or guilt. We will also start to see in their play more aggressive play. They might start to act out some of the violence that they've seen at home, that they've witnessed, that they've heard. So it's important to kind of pay attention to those things too. By adolescence, ages 13 to 18, these experiences can manifest in risk-taking behaviors. We might see more depression, some identity confusion. We also might start to see more of that. They might start to mirror more of the harmful patterns they've observed at home. Again, engaging in domestic violence relationships themselves. So those are developmental tasks. Understanding how domestic violence and trauma affects behavior is crucial in supporting children and adolescents. Behavioral responses, while challenging, oftentimes they're very challenging, are survival strategies developed in response to emotional distress. All behaviors serve a purpose, and it's really just how the brain has learned to cope and to survive. But things we can look for include irritability, withdrawal, again, from family, friends, activities that they like to do. We might see overcompliance, children really being overly obsessed with following the rules. They don't want to, upset anybody. These are not simply signs of any sort of misbehavior or anything like that, but really indicative of something else going on. By viewing these actions through a lens of empathy, caregivers and professionals can really help foster safety and understanding. We are not looking to punish children for their behaviors. We really need to approach the behaviors with consistency and nurturing attitude. I'm not excusing behaviors. I'm not saying that it's okay that they're doing any of these things, but I think we have to look at what the behaviors are trying to tell us. They're not, the children and are not using these behaviors to be defiant, to manipulate anybody. It really is how the brain has learned to cope with feelings and emotions and overwhelming experiences and stress that they've experienced. When we think about trauma, it's essential to recognize that it doesn't just touch emotions or behaviors. It does reach into the classroom. It affects their learning and behavior. Um, Students might appear unmotivated or inconsistent, but that really reflects their efforts to cope with unstable or unsafe environments. Remember, one of the brain's primary roles is survival. So it's important to note that when the brain is in survival mode, it really shuts down all sort of non-essential tasks. So when a student perceives stress or danger, learning takes a backseat. If a student who has experienced domestic violence hears yelling or any sort of loud noises, or somebody drops a book, whatever it is that's triggering them, to their brain instinctually puts them in survival mode. The brain feels like the child is not safe. When they're in the survival mode, they're not physically able to learn math, science, listen to the teacher. So this survival mode can make routine school activities challenging, leading to frequent absences, difficulty with transitions. We might see sudden changes in academic performances, maybe fluctuating grades, missing assignments. These are all signals that a student might be struggling with more than just academics. These challenges often stem from an inability to focus or engage consistently, which is influenced by their home environment. If a child is trying to do homework, but they hear fighting or yelling, it's awfully hard to focus on your homework and concentrate on what you're supposed to be doing. If the family is in tension building phase of the cycle of violence and the student is really worried about what am I going to walk into when I get home, or what's going to happen tonight at home, I'm not thinking about math. They're not thinking about learning. They're worried about what's going to happen tonight and be in that survival mode. Socially and emotionally, trauma can manifest in conflicts with peers or teachers. It does go back to that behavioral piece. But students may become highly sensitive to criticism or rejection, impacting their ability to socially engage with others. So it's important to recognize and understand these things from a trauma lens, and how trauma and domestic violence can impact a student academically and in the classroom. Trauma can also manifest physically in children. First, trauma often reveals itself through physical symptoms. When a child's nervous system is in survival mode, the body might express distress through pain, fatigue, or changes in appetite and sleep. These are not just random occurrences. They're really the body's way of communicating these things are going on when emotions are too overwhelming to verbalize. When we think about chronic stress and how it activates the fight, flight, freeze response, it's really sending the stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, coursing through the body. So if we have that going on, and the brain is also shutting down sort of the non-essential tasks that are not related to survival in this moment, things like digestion, feeling hungry, the need for sleep, all get impacted, which also then impacts the body's immunity system. This is why we see frequent headaches, stomach aches, unexplained aches in children. There really is no medical cause for any of it, but we might see more frequent trips to the nurse's office at school, to the doctor's office, or urgent care. But again, there isn't the medical cause underneath it. We also might see avoidance of going to the doctor, as the offending adult or the offending parent doesn't want the questions asked, doesn't want, to let it know, to be known. So having that control over those things. Recognizing all of these is sort of the first sign in helping children, but we also have to focus on the caregivers and the non-offending parents. When we support the non-offending parent, we're indirectly supporting the child's healing. Caregivers who feel safe, validated, and empowered can reestablish structure and calm at home. It's important that we avoid language that implies blame. These caregivers are also navigating fear and trauma and isolation themselves. It's important that we connect them with community resources, whether that's Remedies, the Family Peace Center. But we need to reinforce that their safety and emotional recovery are essential for their child's recovery. When children see that their parents are feeling supported and are getting the help that they need, they will feel safer in sharing their experiences. So what happens when a child discloses an experience of trauma or an experience of domestic violence? Our response as adults is critical. Imagine for a second the courage it takes for a child to share something so personal. Our main goal needs to be to offer safety and support for that youth. And when I mean safety, I mean in that moment with you, that you are a safe person. This isn't the time to investigate, but we need to listen and validate their feelings. We need to start by being calm, which will help the child feel secure and safe in your presence. It's important that we believe what they're telling us and that we don't make them feel pressured by asking probing or leading questions. This will help them feel more trust in you, and goes a long way to building that trust. It's also important when we are helping and talking to children about this that we use their own words. And it, crucially important that we do not make promises that we can't keep. I think many times when we are faced with a situation that makes us a little bit uncomfortable and we're talking to somebody, our first response, at least in my life, my first response has been, it'll be okay. Everything will be okay. And I can't promise that. I don't know that when the child goes home that everything is going to be okay. So don't make promises you can't keep. It's equally important to manage their expectations honestly. If it's a matter of, I will, help get you support, I will help, walk you through this, that's fine. It's also important that we help manage their anxiety and, and being very open and honest with them. If we have to talk to a supervisor, if we know that if you're a mandated reporter and you know that the child is being harmed, letting them know that I do have to make a report. I do need to call your non-offending parent. All of that will help ease their anxiety and really does set the stage for healing. So I want to talk about resilience, and what it is. It's a term that we often hear, but it's not, sometimes it's hard to understand what it is. So resilience isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about the capacity to bounce back and grow from the challenging experiences. The cornerstone of resilience is connection. It's about having caring, consistent adults in a child's life. These connections help children feel seen, safe, and supported, which is really the foundation that allows children to develop resilience. The one big thing I would like you to keep in mind today is that resilience is built through relationships. It's through these bonds that children find the strength to recover and grow stronger. Connection is not just a protective factor, it's essential to their healing and development. So, how do we build resilience? First, supportive relationships. They can greatly impact and buffer the impact of trauma and stress. When children are surrounded by caring, consistent adults, they feel a sense of belonging and security. This is really crucial for their development and crucial for healing. Predictability plays a key role. Being where you say you're going to be, when you're going to be there, helps the child build trust in you. And children thrive on predictable care. They thrive on routine and safety, because that allows them to build essential life skills. Also, when we're talking about resilience, it's important to remember the importance of community and culture by fostering connections within, a youth's culture and in the community. We provide children with opportunities to grow and strengthen their resilience. So the long-term effects of stress aren't determined by the event alone. They're determined by the pattern of stress activation. When a child's stress response is triggered in unpredictable, extreme, or prolonged ways, their brain and body adapt by becoming sensitized. This means the child's stress system becomes overactive and overly reactive. Dr. Bruce Perry is a leading trauma expert. He has spent probably the better part of the last 40 plus years, looking at trauma, how it impacts the brain, and how it impacts development in children. But he often uses an illustration illustrates this with a simple example. And I kind of want to walk you through it a little bit. So imagine a fire at an elementary school. A veteran firefighter can walk right up to the flames, put them out, business as usual. In contrast, maybe a first grader who is witnessing their classroom on fire, they will experience minutes of intense fear, confusion, and helplessness. This goes back to how each person experiences the event and what stress response is activated. Any long-term effects are determined by the pattern of stress activation. So imagine that the first grader reacted with terror. Meanwhile, a fifth grader who's on the other side of the building didn't feel as threatened. Maybe to them, the fire was exciting. They got out of taking a test. Because they were further from the direct threat, they felt safe the entire time. So we have three people in the same event, each experiencing it differently. Each had a different stress response. Based on years of experience and practice, the firefighter had a moderate activation of stress. The event felt predictable and controllable. For them, it was a resilience building event, not traumatic. For the fifth grader, there was temporary activation in the stress response. So maybe in a week or so, the acute effects of this activation are gone, and they're back to baseline, not traumatized. For the first grader, their stress response systems were highly activated. They will develop a sensitized stress response system. Basically, it was traumatizing. If we connect this back to domestic violence, a child growing up in a violent home doesn't just experience one fire. They live in a house where the fire alarm could go off at any time. Maybe the yelling starts suddenly. Maybe objects are thrown unpredictably. Maybe some days are calm, others are terrifying. Their nervous system is constantly on alert, waiting for the next explosion, waiting for the next thing to happen. That unpredictable and prolonged stress keeps their stress response activated over and over again. So over time, this wires the brain to respond as if danger is always present, even in safe spaces like school. In contrast, predictable, moderate, and controllable stress, like learning a new skill, which can be kind of stressful, practicing a sport, navigating small challenges with the help of a supportive adult, actually builds tolerance and resilience. These are the kinds of safe, consistent experiences that help reset and regulate the stress response. That is why stability, predictability, and safe relationships are so powerful for children who have experienced domestic violence. Every calm, consistent interaction helps shift that sensitized system towards healing. So for healing to happen, what do we have to do? We have to provide opportunities for predictable, moderate, and controllable interactions. When we activate trauma memories and our stress response systems in ways that offer controllability, predictability, we can begin to heal. Healing takes place when there are dozens of therapeutic moments available each day for the child to control, revisiting, and reworking their traumatic experience. I say therapeutic moments. I don't mean that you have to be a therapist in order for this to happen. I'm going to put it maybe in terms that as adults we might recognize and understand. Imagine that it's time for your annual review at work. Maybe you get some negative feedback from your supervisor. You feel very upset and can't believe that you're getting this feedback. So you're upset and you keep thinking about it. You go talk to one of your coworkers. Can you believe they said that? I can't believe they said that about me. What are they thinking? Your coworker listens to you, is supportive, reassures you, validates your feelings. No, that's not true. They're wrong. I don't know what they're talking about. You start to feel better for a little bit. Kind of keep thinking about it. You go to another colleague and you run it by them. Again, you get the support, the validation in your feelings. You go home, you talk to your partner about it, you talk to your family about it. You have engaged in 3 or 4 doses, so to speak, where you controlled how and when you talked about your distressing feedback. Your perspective is heard, you felt supported, you have shifted how you felt about your distress and review. That's how we can help children build resilience, by these relationships, by consistency, by support, and by listening to what they have to say. So as we dive into building resilience, remember that attachment is crucial. It's about connecting deeply with children to help them feel safe and empowered. You, whoever you are and whatever role you play, you are a significant protective factor. Your presence and support can be this difference that helps children heal and grow and believe in their own strength. Having at least one stable, nurturing relationship is the most important protective factor for a child. It's the top predictor of how well someone can recover from adversity. Consistency and safety are foundational. Establishing routines and predictable responses create a safe, welcoming environment where children know what to expect. all important. Skill building, where we are teaching coping and problem solving and healthy relationship skills. Again, you don't have to be a therapist to do any of this. If you are modeling these things, that is helping build these skills. If you are feeling overwhelmed or stressed one day and you take some deep breaths, you end up, I need a timeout, I need to take a walk. You're modeling those things and teaching those skills to children. Um, so we all have a role in breaking the cycle of violence. Simply being calm, consistent, and curious can change how a child or caregiver experiences the support. You don't need all the answers. You really just need to listen, believe, and connect them to the right help. But it's important to think about that we can't build resilience in others without caring for ourselves. So when we work with children and families who've experienced violence or trauma, we naturally absorb some of their pain. It's called secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. Sometimes it's called compassion fatigue. It's not a weakness, it is a human response to empathy over time. But it's important that we watch for signs in ourselves, in our colleagues. Maybe we're seeing chronic fatigue, chronic tiredness. Maybe somebody's more irritable all the time. Maybe they're emotionally numb, feel detached from your work. These are cues that your nervous system needs some care too. And it's important that we engage in self care, whatever that looks like for yourself. As we care for others, it's just as important to protect our own well being because sustainable care creates lasting change. So, some key takeaways for today. If there's one thing to remember about today, it's this: safety and connection are the foundation of healing. It's important that we recognize the signs of domestic violence, that DV is about power and control, and that exposure impacts every domain of a child's life. It's important how we respond to children and survivors of domestic violence. We need to be calm and supportive. We need to believe them and to be that safe person. It's important to know local and national resources and when to refer to appropriate help. So whether you are a teacher, clinician, community partner, advocate, work at the courthouse, your consistent caring presence can be the protective factor that changes a child's story. And it's important that we remember every interaction is an opportunity to help a child feel seen, safe, and supported. These are some national resources: the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the Illinois Domestic Violence Helpline. Love is Respect is for teen dating violence. Also the National Child Abuse Hotline. Knowing our community, our local community resources, we have Remedies Renewing Lives, the Rockford Family Peace Center, Youth Services Network, the Youth Trauma Clinic. We all work with the children and helping children to heal and cope with what they're going through with domestic violence. So that is all I have. Are there any questions or comments?
Yeah. Thank you, Becky. Do people have questions? You can unmute and ask, or you can put them in the chat if you'd like. Becky, if someone wanted to refer someone to the youth trauma clinic, what would they do?
They can just call the number that's on the screen right now and ask to speak. You don't have to dial my extension, but you can ask to speak with somebody in the youth trauma clinic.